and welcome to It's 420 Wyoming. I am your host, Red Hawk. Thank you for joining the first interview of the year. Wyoming NORML is planning to have a special guest speaker on the 20th day of each month at 4:20 p.m., so tune in. Today we have Dr. Dale Gieringer. He received his PhD from Stanford and he's a well-known published marijuana expert. Dr. Dale is the director of California NORML, and it's an honor to have you. It's an honor to talk to you today. Welcome, Doctor.
Good to be here.
As Wyoming hopefully gears up for another legislative attempt at cannabis legalization this year, I have a few questions that I hope will help people's understanding. What is the general history of cannabis legalization in the U.S.?
Well, it goes way, way back, actually. Uh, you know, Wyoming, along with California, where I'm from, have some of the oldest laws against marijuana in the country. Wyoming and California both made cannabis, which is what they called it cannabis indica or Indian hemp back then. They made it illegal in 1913, before really much of anybody had heard of marijuana. Marijuana was brought in by Mexicans, basically. Marijuana refers to the leaf of or the flowers of the plant, which rolled into a cigarette and smoked, right? Uh, and before the Mexicans introduced that practice into the United States, cannabis was normally eaten in like oral forms. Once they had little candies and pastes, which actually were very potent in the day. But the smoking of marijuana was a new custom that was introduced after cannabis was made illegal. Why was it made illegal in 1913? Well, that was a time when a bunch of the states were starting to create their first anti-drug laws. And those laws were mainly aimed at opium and cocaine. But a handful of states just copied the same drugs that were listed in the 1906 Federal Pure Food and Drugs Act as intoxicants. And cannabis was one of those. And even though hardly anybody used cannabis in Wyoming or California at the time, they knew that this is known as an intoxicant. We'll make it illegal. I don't know that anybody was ever arrested in Wyoming in 1913 or 14 for cannabis, but it wasn't too long before the habit of marijuana spread from the Mexican community that came into the United States in the early 20th century and became popular amongst the general population. But so it was made illegal actually before anybody had ever heard of marijuana. And it stayed on the books for all of these years until in California, we started kicking back against this in the 1970s because, California was sort of the center of the counterculture movement, and a lot of people converged on San Francisco and the hippie district there, the Haight-Ashbury, and marijuana became a popular drug there. And as a result, a bunch of hippies actually got together in 1972 and organized the first marijuana legalization initiative, the 1972 California Marijuana Initiative. First time this really became a public issue. The idea of the initiative back then was simply to make it legal for people to use and possess marijuana and then grow it in their backyard. Nothing more than that. And at the time, it was considered a pretty outrageous thing, sort of like gay rights was considered a pretty outrageous thing not that long ago in the United States. Um, the initiative actually lost by, I think, 2-1 or so, but that was considered a really good showing at the time, and it started the ball rolling. And by the early 70s, there were a number of states, California, Oregon was another one, that went on and in their legislatures decriminalized penalties for marijuana. And they did it in California and Oregon, basically because there were just so many marijuana arrests happening that the state couldn't afford it. So even the lawmakers who had a lot of doubts about marijuana realized that here in California, we had 100,000 arrests for marijuana a year in 1974. And it was so expensive. These were all felonies at the time. There were people who went to San Quentin prison for having a couple of joints in their pocket at that time, which is pretty outrageous. So in 1975, the legislature of California followed up and decriminalized marijuana. Didn't make it legal in any sense, but they made it like $100 fine for possessing an ounce or less. And things sort of held that way for quite a while until we went on and legalized medical marijuana in 1996, an effort that I was involved in. And then, of course, we went on. Colorado was the first, and Washington State's were the first states to actually legalize in 2012. So there's quite a long history there, but Wyoming doesn't seem to have ever gotten out from where they were in 1913.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really understand it, since Wyoming is in between Montana and Colorado, both of which seem to be fairly tolerant of marijuana. But there's a lot of differences between different states.
Yes, there is. I think there's a lack of education about marijuana here in Wyoming. People just don't know enough about it. That's why this podcast is important. I hope we can teach some people about marijuana. Let's see here. Folks always bring up about cannabis and driving safety. From your experience, what is the reality?
Well, there's been a lot of work on it. There has been an immense number of studies on this particular problem. And what they show pretty much uniformly is that cannabis does have an adverse effect on driving, but it's a much weaker effect than drunken driving, than alcohol does. And most of the accidents that do occur under marijuana also involve alcohol or other drugs. There's really been no indication in any of the states that have legalized or decriminalized marijuana that accident rates have gone up at all. In fact, it's interesting, here in California, we first made medical marijuana legal, totally legal, in 1996. And since then, the DUI rate in California, the arrest rate, has gone down. And in fact, we recently, just in the last couple of years, have had sort of record low DUI arrests going on, despite the fact that marijuana is totally legal. One thing that may be going on here is, to some extent, people are substituting you taking marijuana instead of alcohol. And if that happens, you're going to have lower accident rates. The basic problem is that alcohol tends to induce people to speed up and drive recklessly. Marijuana tends to make people cautious and slow down. They know that they're conscious that they feel a little impaired, which they do. I mean, people get marijuana tends to make people uh, a little less attentive to things. They tend to not keep as constant a speed or constant a lane position as uh, completely sober drivers do. It doesn't mean they're driving terribly dangerously. Just me doesn't mean that they're having accidents that way. But you know, they'll speed up and slow down, and they'll go to the left and right on the road. And if people get really stoned, of course, they'll get lost a lot. That's something that commonly happens. People can't remember where they are, where they're going. They'll miss a turn. And in real emergency situations, sometimes they will make bad decisions just because they get confused. And that's, I think, the big danger. But the thing is, most people, at least sensible people, realize when they are stoned or buzzed, as the term goes now, and are cautious about driving or have someone else drive for them. And that's less the case with alcohol. So we really have not seen any increase in driving problems because of legality of marijuana. And if you take a look at the Netherlands, for example, Netherlands, cannabis has been sort of de facto legally available now since the 1970s. They've had these cannabis coffee houses there where anybody over 18, it used to be 16, now it's 18 years old, in the Netherlands can go in and buy some marijuana and smoke it and so forth. Netherlands has about the safest traffic record in all of Europe. Safer than its neighboring countries, Germany and Belgium. So there's really no evidence that having marijuana around is a really bad traffic safety hazard. But users should be aware of the fact that getting stoned will compromise your driving at some point. Now, it's also true that there are a lot of chronic users out there, like medical users. There are people who use it every day to control their pain or spasticity or nausea, other conditions they have chronically, and they tend to adjust and compensate and feel less effects from getting stoned than naive users. The biggest danger is with young people and with people who don't have much experience with marijuana are the most adversely affected, I think, in their driving. People who have a lot of experience with it and know how to handle it seem to do better. But it does, in fact, impair reaction time and to a certain extent, and should not be considered an enhancing drug by any means.
That's very interesting. And I do agree with you that it's all about experience. What about cannabis use in the workplace? Drug testing, a lot of people are concerned about that too.
Yeah, well, there's this whole myth that was stirred up under the Reagan administration about marijuana in the workplace, that actually the drug test, well, it's certainly possible that, and there have been cases of workplaces where people were smoking pot all the time and screwing up on the job, and that's a problem. Okay, so that's something worth worrying about. But in some places, not many places, because I think the studies have shown In Canada, for example, they did a wide study of hundreds of thousands of workers and found that workers who use marijuana, at least in general in their lives, are no more are inclined to hazardous work or to accidents on the job than other workers are. However, there are in cases of specific workplaces where there have been occasional rare accidents, but not that many. And what happened in the 1980s, these new technology of drug testing was developed to supposedly detect the problem of impaired uh, performance. The problem is the technology that was developed was this urine testing. It's common, very invasive of privacy. The notion that they could detect in your urine these chemicals. They're actually not active chemicals. They're what called metabolites. They're leftover chemicals from having used marijuana sometime in the past, but show that you have used marijuana, perhaps in the last few hours or perhaps the last few days, or if you happen to be a regular user, these chemicals can last for weeks in your urine. And the notion was, well, if we detect anybody who has these chemicals in their urine is, well, for one thing, they're a criminal, right? Because it's illegal to use marijuana, and we should just assume that they're too dangerous to work on the job. Now, that was an assumption that if you looked for people who'd ever used marijuana, tested positive on these urine tests, you were detecting people who were dangerous on the job. Now, people were actually thinking in terms of the alcohol breathalyzer, which is something, of course, it's used to detect DUIs on the road all the time. But there's a big difference between the alcohol breathalyzer and these urine tests. And the big difference being that that the alcohol breathalyzer detects alcohol while it's actually active in your system. Whereas the urine tests detect these inactive metabolites that linger for a long time afterwards. It's sort of like if you went through workers' trash for empty liquor bottles, and if you found empty liquor bottles or beer cans or something like that, you decided that they were drunks. This technology was popularized under the Reagan administration, partly by former federal DEA and drug policy officials who went on and founded private companies specializing in these tests. Without any really compelling evidence that the tests work, which would never been shown, there's never been a really a sound scientific study showing that these tests have any positive effect on workplace safety. But despite that, the federal government implemented these tests at the order of these officials, who then went on to leave government and found companies to profit off of the drug testing. And everybody has assumed ever since, that these tests were important or useful, but the evidence was never there. And in fact, there have been studies showing like there's no difference between between workers testing positive for marijuana on these tests and regular workers. They just don't detect impairment. And it took us a long, long time to get the public to understand this at all. And a lot of the public does not understand it. And probably in Wyoming, they don't. But here in California, we started a campaign, I did, California NORML, a few years ago to eliminate urine testing as a qualification for employment. And in fact, we succeeded in 2022 on getting a law passed that really bans the use of urine testing as a condition for employment. We're very proud of that law. A lot of cities have started getting rid of these urine tests, and we hope that's the way of the future. They are being replaced now by, in some places, uh, uh, by another kind of test, an oral swab test where they wipe your mouth with a cotton swab. Those tests are more sensitive to recent use. Um, they it depends on how the test and how sensitive they want to make it. They can detect use as much as 2 days later. More typically, they detect it for usually just a few hours during the time when somebody would have been on the job. I think they're very good at detecting on the job use of marijuana, and workplaces that are concerned about possible on the job use as opposed to ever having used marijuana, are some of them are adopting these oral swab tests instead of the urine tests. But a lot of places are just getting rid of the marijuana tests altogether, especially in states and locations where marijuana is legal.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's very interesting. A lot of people are also concerned about quality of the products, especially the Delta 8 variants.
Well, okay, Delta 8 is a new development that sort of it's really a synthetic product of synthetic chemistry more than anything else. Your natural marijuana plant has very minuscule levels of delta 8 THC in it, maybe none at all. It's a very hard thing to detect. There's some marijuana that has like maybe 0.001% of delta 8 THC. Delta 8 THC is a molecule that resembles the standard delta 9 THC is what makes people high in marijuana. Delta 8 means that an electron on one of the atoms in the molecule has moved to a different location. And so the delta 8 is very similar to delta 9, but it is different. Now, recently, it has become popular for people who, in particular in the hemp industry, to manufacture Delta 8 out of hemp. And this has been sort of a loophole in federal law here. As you know, a few years ago, the federal government legalized hemp, and on the condition that hemp was defined to have very low levels of delta 9 THC, like 0.03%. But on the other hand, the hemp had a lot of another chemical, CBD, which people have heard of, sort of a non-psychoactive but medically interesting chemical that has been widely used in sort of health food store situations. But CBD really doesn't have produce much of any effect when you take it, very little. However, it's very easy to convert CBD into delta 8 THC by very simple kind of chemistry that you could do in your kitchen practically. Very easy. The problem is when you do it, you also produce a stew of other chemicals, a whole bunch of other chemicals that it's not necessarily clear what they all are, but you do get a high proportion of this delta 8. And delta 8 is then sold thanks to a federal court, stupid federal court decision decided that because the CBD from the hemp is legal, then it's legal to turn it into Delta 8 THC, which is absurd. I think it was a mistaken court decision legally. But anyhow, that's the law, federal law, and it's encouraged a widespread commerce in Delta 8 products manufactured from hemp and distributed through the internet and other sources in smoke shops around the country. Now, what about Delta 8? In itself, it seems to be like a weaker version of Delta 9, maybe 1/2 or 1/3 as potent. And it's probably not at all dangerous. There were, in fact, studies in Israel with Delta 8 many years ago. They were testing it for use as a treatment for nausea from cancer chemotherapy in children, pediatric cancer chemotherapy. They found that Delta 8 seemed to be helpful. They never developed it as a drug in particular, but it did show potential and it did not seem to be harmful. So I think that Delta 8 is probably pretty safe, and as I say, it's probably weaker than Delta 9. The problem is the contaminants that may sneak in this whole process of conversion of the hemp CBD into Delta 8, and that's really messy. Plus, there are a whole bunch of other things other than Delta 8 that they are making out of hemp, some of which are known to be dangerous. One of which is called THCO acetate, or THCO, and that has chemicals in it that are definitely dangerous to the lungs, can cause lung damage when you smoke it. You may remember there was an incident like 3 or 4 years ago with some vape pens that were cannabis vape pens that were causing serious lung damage in the users. And it turned out that that was due to certain contaminants that were in the vape pens. And those contaminants are very chemically similar to THCO acetate. Okay, so there's a bunch of other artificial cannabis chemicals that don't appear naturally at all that they have been manufacturing from hemp that I think are dangerous and really could be dangerous. We don't really know. They've not been tested in human subjects, and people should really stay away from those. I should add there's been some feedback about this, and Congress has finally gotten word about this, and there's efforts afoot in Congress to make a federally close this loophole that allows them to convert the hemp CBD into other chemicals. And I wouldn't be surprised to see the Delta 8 be made illegal then, although there are safe ways of producing Delta 8 that some of the licensed cannabis companies in California and Colorado and elsewhere have come up with that may produce a good, fairly pure Delta 8 THC from cannabis, but that's expensive and it's rare. So yeah, be careful of the Delta 8 products and all of the hemp products other than the CBD. The CBD is not going to hurt you at all. It's not going to compromise your driving ability. It may not cure your migraines or your arthritis, but it won't hurt either. As I say, it's sort of like the other stuff at the health food stores.
And I noticed that a lot of Delta 8 is completely different, even though they say it's the same thing. And
well, that could be because of contaminants. I mean, you don't know that you're getting Delta 8. You're getting Delta 8 plus other stuff, is quite likely. And it could be that that accounts for why things feel different about it. But do you find some of it is very strong, or
I feel like it's different every time.
hmm? Well, that it could be. There's a bunch of different companies that are making this stuff, and
Yeah.
who knows?
And I don't really know who is the person checking the quality on every single product.
Well, there isn't. At least not in Wyoming. There isn't anybody doing that. Um, in uh, in California, they're supposed to be doing some sort of testing, but they don't rigorously because I mean it's very hard to police the whole internet products, right? And there's no federal system. There's no it isn't like the FDA has rules about purity of delta 8 THC at the moment because actually that's still all illegal as far as the FDA is concerned. That's what like delta 9 THC is illegal in the under the FDA. Delta 8 THC is illegal too. But even though it's illegal for the FDA, doesn't mean it's illegal to sell in commerce the way as long as you don't pretend that it's a drug, then FDA doesn't really have authority over it. If you said this is a drug, then FDA could say, "Oh no, this is an illegal drug." But if you don't, if you just put it out there, then it's sort of like something that's in the health food stores, and there's not much federal regulation of it.
And what about legal um, THC vapes?
Well, those are uh, a lot safer. I mean, those are very safe. I think vapes are probably the way that things are going to go for inhaled cannabis. Uh, Vaporizers, there's been a big scare campaign about vaporizers. Vaporizers are a really effective smoke harm reduction tool. When you smoke anything, whether it's tobacco or marijuana or any other herb, you're getting just hundreds, literally hundreds of chemicals that are produced by burning leaf. And a bunch of them are carcinogenic and have other noxious properties. I mean, you get benzene, you get hydrogen cyanide is produced by burning. Ammonia, formaldehyde, all of these things, usually in very small quantities, and not, but certainly you don't want to be exposing yourself to that chronically all the time in large quantities. So the nice thing about vape pens and e-cigarettes is they eliminate all of the burning. The burning happens at high temperatures when you ignite something and it starts burning. You have to get it above the point of combustion, and then the point of combustion is around 450 degrees Fahrenheit. And then as soon as it combusts, it goes up to over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and that produces lots of extra chemicals. If you can keep it down below the point of combustion, you mainly get, cannabinoids. You get THC and you get the terpenes. The terpenes are the things that you smell and taste in cannabis. They're volatile. They're things that are in many common organic products like lemons and limes and lavender, and all have these odoriferous, volatile chemicals known as terpenes in them. And some of those very same chemicals are in marijuana and give marijuana its distinct smell. They tend to evaporate. So if you hold the temperature down under the point of combustion, you will get those terpenes, which a lot of people think have effects of their own, along with the cannabis, and you will not get the hundreds of other toxic byproducts of combustion. So that's the theory behind vape pens and vaporization. And you get a lot less smoke from them. And you get much less secondhand smoke because usually, when you're smoking a cigarette, uh, or a joint, a lot of the smoke just goes up in the air like this and gets lost. It's side stream smoke, and it goes into the air. The vape pens are generally designed to only uh, uh, produce vapor when you're actually inhaling. When you put the vape pen down, it stops producing anything. So you're really cutting down on secondhand smoke as well. And they're very discreet and actually very hard to detect, which is, I guess, a problem. I think in some environments, I think a lot of schools are upset about students using vape pens because it's really hard to tell that they're using them. A lot harder to detect than cigarettes. But from a health standpoint, I think they're a real benefit. And the issue is, again, you have to make sure that the fluid, that the concentrate that they have in the vape pen is pure and doesn't have contaminants of one sort or another. And in California, those all the vape concentrates and so forth are tested pretty thoroughly for that sort of thing, and that would be true in Colorado and most of the states where things are legal. However, if you buy vape cartridges from the illegal market, that's another matter. And as I mentioned before, we had that whole problem a few years ago with the so-called E-Valley lung disease that was caused by this underground illegal cannabis concentrate that was being used in vape pens, and it was a toxic product. So there, better to use a vape pen, a vape that comes from Colorado or I guess Montana too, or from California, than something that comes, on the internet from the unlicensed market out there. But we're hoping that, I think vape pens are the way of the future. Unfortunately, they have been the subject of a big public scare campaign by the public health community and the FDA and the federal people, because and that's really concentrated not on so much on the cannabis vapes as on the nicotine vapes that are out there for tobacco smokers. And I think it's a very ill-advised campaign because a lot of smokers have found that they can, quit. They can eliminate their use of smoked cigarettes by inhaling these nicotine e-cigarettes, because, as I say, it cuts down all of these pollutants that are generated by combustion and smoke production. And somehow the public health crowd have got it in their mind that, it's really bad to have a safer alternative to smoking, because they argue, well, this will just encourage people to go on smoking. But that there's no evidence for that. In fact, what we have seen in recent years is as there's been an explosion in e-cigarette use in the United States, nicotine e-cigarette use. While that's been happening, the smoking rate has been going down. So, I think it's a very healthy thing, but the public health crowd is scared of it and has made a disinformation campaign trying to persuade Americans that vapes are somehow more dangerous than smoking. They're not. And if you go to other countries like Britain, the public health authorities there regard e-cigarettes as a public health harm reduction benefit. They say that they are 95% safer for health than smoking. And I've seen, and the studies I've seen bear that out when you actually analyze what's coming out of e-cigarettes and compare it to what's coming out of smoke, you find actually reductions of 99.9% in most of your common toxins and carcinogens that you worry about in smoke. Uh, so, yeah, I think vape pens are good. Vaporizers in general are good technology. Uh, I wish that the federal government would come up with some regulations to would actually recognize them, and that we had some manufacturing standards and regulations to make sure that they don't get toxins in the concentrates and things like that. Uh, Hopefully that will happen, but I don't see it happening soon.
Yeah. And I've seen some seeds that they say are guaranteed female for the cannabis plant. Is
Uh,
that real?
uh, you know, to some extent, it's real. I haven't seen any good studies. I just hear anecdotal evidence about those, and I'm told that feminized, so-called feminized seeds are, yeah, they are more likely to be female seeds than not, but they're not 100% reliable. So you still have to watch the crop when you're growing with those things. I don't think anybody has a 100% reliable way of producing female plants from seed yet. Although people who really seriously concerned about that usually use clones instead, and that when you have a clone of a female, you're going to get a female.
Mhm. Yes, cloning. So is it illegal to have THC seeds in a state where THC is illegal?
Yeah, it's legal. Yeah, yeah, it's legal. The seeds are legal in California and Colorado and places like that, but they're not legal under federal law, and they're certainly not legal in Wyoming.
Okay. But what about CBD seeds?
Hemp seeds are totally legal under U.S. law
Mhm.
anywhere. You
Yeah, and
can,
I heard that you can also eat them too.
yep, yep. They make a good oil too, a good oil for pesto and for salad oils and things like that. Uh, and you'll see hemp seed products. I think I saw we have hemp seed granola on the shelves. The quality of that has really improved. Yeah, since they legalized hemp seed and the hemp in the United States. Before that, before they passed the Farm Bill, I think it was when was that? About 10 years, a few years ago. Before then, uh, the only kind of hemp seed that was legal in the United States was sterilized hemp seed, which was available for bird. They sold for bird seed mainly, but you could buy sterilized hemp seed, and people tried to produce oil and other products out of it, but it was tended to be stale and it didn't taste very good. But the fresh hemp seed that we now have available in the United States is good stuff.
Yeah. And a question I have is what does it look like if a farmer grew his own hemp? Where would you have to send the hemp off to get processed?
I can't answer that question to get processed.
Okay.
In Wyoming, I don't know. Are there any licensed hemp growers in Wyoming? I think
Yeah. Yeah.
there are.
Yes, there are.
There are. Okay. Well, I don't know how Wyoming handles it. It's sort of a state by state basis because every hemp is legal under federal law, but you have to have sort of I think your state agriculture commission deals with it, and I don't follow that closely. Uh, Processing, I don't know. I think you could just cut it down and put it through a seed press or something like that, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. Oh, that was great. So much good info. Thank you for being here today.
My pleasure. I hope you have some greater success here in Wyoming. It's been one of the difficult plain states here have been very resistant to even the simplest decriminalization or marijuana or the legalization of medical marijuana. It's been really difficult there, but uh, take a tip from Colorado and Montana.
Thank you
Okay,
so much for being here today.
you're welcome.